right, Raren, you and I have done a few of these now, and today I think is going to be quite a fun one for you. So I think you and I actually did this over on your channel with Hearthstone cards, but today I am going to be showing you some of the most toxic Yu-Gi-Oh cards that you've ever seen, and you've got two goals today. Your goals are to tell me, one, if you think the card is good, and then two, if you think the card was actually banned on top of it. How you feeling about that?
So you're showing me every single Yu-Gi-Oh card that's ever existed?
Pretty much, yeah, that's the plan. I think we can do that in an hour, right?
Yeah.
We'll speed run it, right? PB, we got a PB.
I'm done. I'm actually excited for this, to see what you guys consider like toxic. Is Maxi the first card?
Maxi actually is the first card, because that was the card I was the most curious about of your perspective.
Well, so I actually know what Maxi does, right? Because like I had the luxury. I had the pleasure, the experience of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, and this card obviously is very good.
Why don't you read it for people who aren't familiar?
Maxi is during either player's turn, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard. This turn, each time your opponent special summons a monster or monsters, immediately draw a card. You don't know, drawing cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very good.
I hear it's okay.
It's amazing, and in fact, this card allows you to win a game that you have no right winning. And it also makes your opponent feel fucking miserable when they're fucking doing their thing. And you're like, oh shit, I'm about to draw so many cards. The only positive thing about Maxi, to be honest, is there's sometimes that mini game where you have to ask yourself, like, do I just rip it? Like, and just hope for the best? That's the only like decision that really matters. But often,
that's a positive.
That's the, out of everything in the world for Yu-Gi-Oh, that's the only thing I can give it. I don't know. I'm surprised this card is not banned. At least in Master Duel. Like, I guess it's banned in locals. You're gonna have to correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so it's banned in the TCG, but it's legal in the OCG, which is like the Asian territories, and it's legal in Master Duel. Yes,
it's obviously very good. So yeah, end of discussion.
I was just curious because since you're the Yu-Gi-Oh master now that we've seen you play on your channel, I was curious what your overall thoughts were now that you've gotten to experience the insect for yourself.
So I don't know how many card games you've actually played. I know you used to play Magic, but I don't think I've ever seen a card with that amount of play rate across any card game I've ever played. Like,
yeah, so for people who don't know, Maxi has like a 95% play rate on Master Duel. It hovers in the 90 percentile every time they give us the statistics for it. It's disgusting.
Yeah, just for context as well, like Hearthstone right now has a pretty ubiquitous card across classes. Obviously, in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's no like, Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have classes, but Hearthstone has like the neutral pool, and at the moment, the highest percentage after its nerf is 60%. So like, just to give you context, before it used to be 66 before the nerf, but that's the highest, and that card is considered very, very good. So like, think about 95 percentile of like how ridiculous Maxi is.
Yep. So now let me ask you this: like, do you feel like are you a fan of this card? Do you hate this card? Like, where do you stand with this?
Well, so how do I answer this?
Let me answer for you. Let me take a guess. You like when you activate it against your opponent, but you hate when it's activated against you.
When my opponent plays cards, I want to throw up. And they sit there and take it. That's what I like. No, I think Maxi actually is probably a necessary evil in some cases. Like, but it's probably not great that you could play it. Maybe it might have to be like a preemptive thing. Like, you know what I mean? Maybe they should make it so like you have to activate on your turn, and then like your opponent's next turn is when you actually draw the cards. I don't even know how they fix it. They probably just have to ban it. It's probably not healthy. It felt like a lot of games came down to, did I get this card in my opening hand? The counter argument is, do I have like the Ash to actually block it?
Yep, which is why Ash has the second highest play rate, because it's one of the best cards to counter Maxi. One thing that's interesting is that at the current moment in the TCG, they're actually releasing a new archetype of cards. Basically do what Max C does, but they have more restrictions, but they still do the, draw one card for each type of special summon. But they have the restrictions that I believe you can't control any cards, and then it only like works in certain areas of the game. So like I think the first one they released only works on monsters special summon from the hand. So the graveyard and the deck are off limits. But the second one, I think, it works from the main deck or extra deck. And then people are assuming the third one that's going to be released in a future set is going to work from the graveyard or banished pile. So they took Maxi and like broke it down into different pieces just to show how powerful it is. And people are still playing those versions of Maxi. So like in the OCG, they have 9 Maxis right now, effectively.
Oh my God. Doesn't
that sound fun? Doesn't that sound great?
Yeah. What's even funnier is I think Stevie showed me this card like the very first time I looked at Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and I think I said this card's bad. I don't think I've ever heard that man scream so loud like this is the best card of the game.
It is basically like the best card of the game. Yeah, it's interesting though, because to be fair, when it was first released, it actually wasn't considered to be very good because special summoning wasn't like what you've experienced it as in modern Yu-Gi-Oh. At most, this card was released in like 2011, 2012. At most, you would maybe special summon a couple times in a turn. And so a lot of people would just not play Maxi, or maybe it would see play in like the sideboard. And it took Yu-Gi-Oh evolving into what it's become today for Maxi to really be this like just overwhelming force throughout the game.
Well, good luck.
Thanks.
Well, good luck.
So this, I wanted to get your opinion on this first because you've already seen this card. So hopefully a lot of the other cards I show you today are cards you haven't seen before. Now keep in mind, they're not all going to be as good as Maxi, and I'm throwing some in here to potentially mess with you. So you're going to have to figure out if the cards are actually good or not, and then obviously you can determine whether or not they are banned. So let's go ahead and throw up the next card here. Let's move on to a spell card.
Kaiser Colosseum. If there is one or more monsters on the field of the controller of this card, his/her opponent cannot place a monster on the field if his/her number of monsters would exceed the number of monsters that are on the field of this card's controller. The cards that are already on the field before this card activation are unaffected by this. Okay, so if I have one monster and then I play this, my opponent can have more than one monster on their field unless they kill this. Is that really okay? So see, the word toxic in Yu-Gi-Oh is so difficult because there's so much nonsense in this game. Like Hearthstone, it's very obvious when like a card is just egregious and like it needs help, or like we need to do something about that card like pretty fast. Like this is an effect that I think if it was in Hearthstone, like it'd be nerfed like so quickly. Oh my God, that'd be so annoying. Even like I've been playing a ton of Magic recently. I think in Magic this would also be like extremely annoying to play against.
So if it's really annoying for Hearthstone and if it's really annoying for Magic, is it really annoying for Yu-Gi-Oh?
See, that's the line. Like that's I don't know. Like I think in terms of like actually how you would feel about it, yeah, it's pretty annoying. But is it really good enough to see play when you can just pop the back row? Because like it's just monsters, right? Like there's a card that probably answers this for the most part. But that is a very good effect. But like, what if you have no monsters on the board? It's just a useless card.
If you have no monsters on the field, then your opponent can summon as much as they want.
I'm on the like my Hearthstone brain's telling me, yeah, this is fucked. The part of me that used to play Yu-Gi-Oh and may never go back is telling me like, this could be worse. But it's good. Like it has to be.
I'm glad Yu-Gi-Oh's rubbed off on you in that way. Like, it could be worse. It could be Maxi.
Realistically, it could be Maxi. I guess the question I should ask myself is, would I rather like, is Maxi infinitely worse than this card? You're stopping your opponent from summoning, but at least if they have an answer to the Colosseum, then it's like, okay, I mean, we can still do my turn like normal. But Maxi's like, yeah, you could summon your monsters, but I'm also getting stuff. So like, be careful.
I think they're two different cards. Right?
They do, yeah, for sure. I'm just thinking like
they're diametrically opposed.
The potential of Maxi, I think, is so much higher than this card, though.
If it makes you feel any better, Maxi was released, I want to say 8 years after this card was released.
Okay, so this is a pretty old card.
You can tell, right. It just looks old by the image.
Normally when we do these videos where usually like we talk about like the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm guessing you're talking throughout like Yu-Gi-Oh's history.
I mean, you can analyze like both older and newer. I'm going by like current day.
Current day, okay. Current day, I don't think this is good enough. So I don't think it's banned, but I can see it being played at some point to counter like a meta deck, but I'm just not really sure if that's the case because there might just be better cards to remove it. So I'll just say it's not good.
Final answer?
That's my final answer.
Well, you could not be more wrong because all your intuition was correct and then you decided to go against it. This card is extremely toxic for all the reasons you aforementioned, right? It's really frustrating, especially when you maybe see this card in tandem with some of the other cards in Yu-Gi-Oh, that if you stick a monster that's very hard to kill, let's say, or has like some other floodgate type effect to prevent your opponent from playing, and now all of a sudden you back it up with Kaiser Coliseum. Now they can't even summon more monsters to like deal with the monster that you put out, and then they're basically just stuck there. It's one of those cards that is absolutely atrocious to play against, even by like earlier Yu-Gi-Oh standards. This card has seen like a ton of play, and anytime this card is played, everyone just groans. It's so fucking atrocious.
See, it's interesting that like I would think, especially in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, like there would be a way to deal with this card like pretty easily.
It depends, right? Because a lot of the resourcefulness or toolboxiness in Yu-Gi-Oh nowadays resides in the extra deck. So it requires you to have multiple monsters on the field to either synchro summon or Xyz summon or link summon or whatever you're doing. And if your opponent just has one monster, you're not even allowed to put two monsters on the field, so you can't access that toolboxiness. So like a lot of the spell and trap removal might be in the extra deck, because as a player, you might think, oh, if I need to do this, I can just go to my extra deck where I can access it all times, rather than hoping I draw the card from my main deck to out the Kaiser Coliseum. Right? That's not to say people don't play spell and trap removal. Of course they do, but you might not see that in the first game. Maybe in the games 2 or 3, once the sideboard's in play, if people know, oh, I might get Kaiser Coliseum'd, I need to make sure I have in, my back row hate to be able to make sure I can actually play the game. It's one of those cards that the player sets up and it's like out my board or you lose the game type of card. And Kaiser Coliseum is just very disgusting as a result of that. It's one of the oldest instances. There are probably worse offenders nowadays, which we may or may not see later. But it's a very old card and a very annoying one. And it's banned both in the TCG and the OCG. I don't know about Master Duel. I would imagine it's banned there, but it might actually be legal, which is weird if it is.
I don't know. Maybe like it's just because like I didn't go against this card once when I played Yu-Gi-Oh, so that makes me think like maybe it's not as good as I.
Well, that might be because if it's banned in Master Duel, that's why you probably never played against it.
Interesting.
This card you may have seen in Master Duel. Let me just think about this one.
Skill Drain. Activate this card by paying 1,000 life points. Negate the effects of all face-up monsters while they're face-up on the field, but their effects can still be activated. So like this is if a monster activates their effect, then you proc this.
So it doesn't have to activate its effects. For instance, if there's a monster that has a continuous effect that says this card cannot be destroyed by battle, Skill Drain will negate that, so that monster can now be destroyed by battle. The last part where it says, but their effects can still be activated, means that you can still activate their effects. It's just when the effect resolves, it'll be negated. So for instance, if there's a monster that says cost, discard a card, effect, do whatever, the cost can still be paid, but the effect won't go through. So there's like some like little gimmicks you can do with Skill Drain, like as a result of that.
Okay. That's I guess that's kind of interesting. So just a further like example, like I couldn't use Baron's effect to like pop a card off the board.
Right. So the play pattern there would be like if you go Baron effect, well, this is probably gonna be a bad example because it's Baron exactly, but if you went Baron effect, pop a card, I would activate Skill Drain in response, and then you could chain Baron to negate Skill Drain, which doesn't help in this example. But let's say Skill Drain was out before you summoned Baron. If you summon Baron, then try to activate the Baron to pop something, then it would just negate it. You wouldn't be able to pop anything with Baron, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay, so this is just like global counter spell for every monster on the board.
Pretty much. Like, how would this work in Hearthstone? Or is there a card that does this in Hearthstone?
They wouldn't print something like this in Hearthstone unless it's like an AoE silence. Which is, I guess they have printed this, but this card is very like, you could.
But it stays on the field. It's a continuous trap as well.
Yeah, Hearthstone's they don't like effects like this where it kind of stops your opponent from like playing their deck, but
sure,
they give you the tools to at least fight against it. This constant aura would be like extremely frustrating, but also I don't know how it would work in Hearthstone because like in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's often you would use the effect when it's on board. Like there's very few instances of cards that are like that. Like Titans are like the few example of that, where a lot of it's like battle cry, right? So like it uses their effect before they even go on the board.
Oh, is that how it works in Hearthstone? Interesting. I don't think I like knew that mechanically. That's fascinating.
Yeah, there's very few cards. There's actually, I think, I'm trying to think in my mind. I think there's only one card in the history of Hearthstone that stops like a battle cry.
Interesting.
And people hated that card with an absolute passion. Did I show you that card? It was called Objection, like the toxic episode.
You did show me that. Yes,
so, like,
yes, you did show me that.
That's like the only card in the game that has stopped like battle cries. And like people, like that is one of the most hated cards of all time. Like if not worse, like because people, it just feels miserable to play against it. So I couldn't even imagine an effect like if it said like stop all battle cries your opponent plays. Like holy fuck, I'd lose my mind against that shit. If that's the same case it is in Yu-Gi-Oh, this card's probably like pretty great. Again, the question comes down to how devastating is an effect like this? And I guess it's pretty great because it seems like you said, like a lot of the monsters, you need a lot of effects from like your extra deck, which require like effects from monsters. And like, if I remember anything from Yu-Gi-Oh, like you really need to use your effects from monsters. Like they win you games. So unless there is a card that you have that is, I guess, a spell to like pop this, you're in a really bad spot. Like probably in an infinitely worse spot than it is with the Colosseum. I'm actually not sure what card is actually more annoying here.
Interesting. Okay.
But now that you say that, I think this card's worse than the Colosseum. And the fact that it's an aura is really annoying, but so is the Colosseum. And if the Colosseum's a really good card, I would imagine Skill Drain's almost at the same level. But I guess the Colosseum is more limiting because you could still, I guess, get cards out of your extra deck. You just can't use their effect unless you got another card. Where Colosseum is like you're stopping your opponent from playing the game. I think this card's still good though. I'm just trying to like I'm like second guessing because of what happened with Colosseum.
You're in your head.
Yeah, because like in Hearthstone, I think this card, like obviously this card would be one of the most frustrating things. I mean, I could say that about like every Yu-Gi-Oh card at this point. So.
That's true. That's honestly, by the end of this, you're going to probably say that about every card I show you.
Dude, I'm just gonna get like a little tangent here. I've been recently, like I played Hearthstone for like since it's closed beta, right? And I've always like, oh, I fucking hate this game. It's so bad now. Like it's so awful because like you're just playing your card game. Like you played it for so much. So I'm like, I go play Magic. If you haven't played like you've played Magic, but like if people who are watching this haven't played Magic, right? It is a really good game. But there's also really dumb shit in it, at least in my opinion. Like, I'm not a huge fan of lands. I don't know how you feel about lands, but going from like a passive mana system to lands and Magic makes me want to throw up.
Sure.
I'm like, you know what? A Hearthstone actually isn't that bad. So I go back to Hearthstone. And then it's the same cycle over and over again. So
it's like, perspective, right? It's perspective.
So like, maybe Yu-Gi-Oh is actually amazing. But then if I go play Yu-Gi-Oh and someone skill drains me, I'm going to be like, wow, I don't want to play this game anymore. So I don't know. I feel like this is so difficult for me. You have no idea because I feel like a Magic player would have a much easier time than a Hearthstone player because at least Blizzard doesn't want to punish its players like this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like Hearthstone, what you've been saying, and from what I've learned when we do our videos on your channel, I feel like Hearthstone really learned from Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh, and I don't know about Pokemon really because I don't know too much about that game, about just like cards that like don't let you play the game and how like they're unfun, right? Where like Magic, I believe, has cards that are probably equally as annoying as Skill Drain, if not more so. And I feel like Hearthstone, just from a design perspective, is like, okay, we're going to try to not have these. But to be fair, our games are also fundamentally different in that we can interact with the opponent during their turn, where Hearthstone you can't.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean you couldn't still have stuff like the Kaiser Coliseum, hypothetically, isn't a trap card. So like that could theoretically exist in Hearthstone. Whether or not that's good is a different story, but
yeah, I think they've done a really good job of not printing cards like this. Like I've showed you, like obviously, like I showed you like toxic cards considering, but nothing is like Skill Drain. Like nothing is like go fuck yourself. Like when you play your cards, like there's nothing truly like that in the game. So from my Hearthstone brain, I think this card is good. I'd imagine it did see play. I could see it banned, but I mean, if Colosseum is banned, but like fucking Maxi, bro. I don't know. I'm going to go with it's probably not banned, but I could see it being good.
Okay. All right. Final answer.
Final answer.
Skill Drain's also an old card. I think this version I showed you is actually quite new. But Skill Drain, I think, came out actually before Kaiser Coliseum, potentially. If not, it was like within a set or two. But very old card. Skill Drain was just as annoying back then as it was today. Skill Drain is still to this day a card that it's gone all over the ban list. I don't know if it's actually ever been banned. I think it may have been. It's been limited several times and was at 1 for a very long period of time. But sometimes it'll go from 1 to 3 to 2. They just put it wherever the fuck they want. It was never really, I want to say, part of a tier 1 dominating like meta contender. It's always typically used in two ways. It's either in a deck that has like a gimmick that takes advantage of Skill Drain's negation effect, or it's used in side decks that after games 2 and 3, when you go first, you can do whatever you want, and then you set Skill Drain, and all of a sudden your opponent like can't play the game. Skill Drain has a lot of really cool, unique applications. So for instance, where it says negate the effects of all face-up monsters while they're face-up on the field, there are some cards hypothetically, that tribute themselves for cost from the field. And then when the effect is resolving, since they're no longer on the field, Skill Drain actually doesn't negate it. So it's a way to like get around Skill Drain, which is kind of cool. Activate the effect of a monster. And let's say you have another spell card that's a quick play spell that can say destroy that monster. When the chain resolves, the spell card will destroy the monster, and the monster's effect will actually resolve since, again, it's no longer on the field. So there's some cool little tricks with skill drain. Also, there are some cards that, like, say, oh, this card, if you normal summon it, it only has 1,000 attack points, but its default attack points might be 3,000. Skill drain will just negate that effect. So now you can just normal summon 3,000 attack point guys for free. Not as relevant in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, but for older Yu-Gi-Oh, there was what were called skill drain beatdown decks that would just play these giant idiots. And then because skill drain's out, they're 3,000 attack, and your opponent can't use monster effects to fight them back. So if they don't have good spell and trap removal, they're just going to get run over by all these giant things that weren't really meant to be used in that way. So skill drain does enable a lot of really cool strategies, but for the most part, it's typically only used for oppressive things. And it's a card that people really go back and forth on it. People feel that sometimes, like, oh yeah, skill drain's a fine card to be at 3. Like, no one's really playing it. And then they'll put it to 3, and then everyone's like, fuck this card. Skill drain sucks. Like, I can't believe I'm losing to this because this card's so toxic. It's a very polarizing card, but it's still, like, in terms of, like, as the most oppressive thing you could be doing, I wouldn't say this is it. I would say it's, like, up there, but there's definitely worse things you could be doing. But skill drain was definitely one of, like, the first floodgates in Yu-Gi-Oh! And has a very lasting impression on the game, I would say.
Okay, interesting.
Speaking of newer cards, this is actually a newer card. Let's see what you think about this one.
Dimension Shifter. You have no cards in your graveyard. Quick effect, you could send this card from your hand to the graveyard. Until the end of next turn, any cards in the graveyard is banished instead. And that means your opponent's graveyard as well?
Yes, any graveyard.
And quick effect means you could use this on your opponent's turn.
Correct.
Oh my god. That seems pretty good. You can send this to from your hand to the graveyard till the end of next turn. Any card sent to the graveyard is banished. So this means that this card is also banished.
No, this will go to the graveyard. And then after that resolves, anything for your turn or anything during that turn and then the turn after will be banished.
Oh my god, what the fuck? That sounds awful. But, okay. You know, obviously, like, you played enough card games, and I think this is probably a phrasing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like tech cards, where it's like you use a tech card to beat a strategy, and like you're literally putting that card into your deck to hopefully beat that strategy. This is like the tech card that beats like every strategy. Because like I feel like the graveyard is so important here, and like it's like the reverse Maxi in a sense, where like you're not drawing any cards, but you're basically stopping your opponent from having more cards. Like you're like, because I feel like this is. Because I'm thinking of it from the Sword Soul deck. If you did this to me, I feel like half the deck is like not even usable anymore, if not more. So like I feel like I'm in a really bad spot if you played Shifter. I didn't see this card once, which makes me think it's banned. Like why wouldn't anyone play this? Like it feels like it's so good. And that's my logic. Like, what?
I like how your like 40 games on Master Duel is determining whether or not I haven't seen it in like 40 games going to Diamond. You know, must not be good or it's banned.
Listen, I feel like in Yu-Gi-Oh! Especially, like you'd see the really good cards often, right?
That's fair. That's fair.
Like, but Maxi is so egregious. Like it has warped my perspective of like what a good card is. I don't know.
I mean, that might be a hard bar to clear, to be fair. So maybe don't compare everything directly to Maxi.
I almost wish I didn't know Maxi existed, you know? Like, I feel like it really...
I think we all feel that way, Rare. I think we all feel that way.
I feel like it's really fucked my Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, perspective up. Like, because that guy... Anyways, I feel like this card is good. I'm just trying to think of, like, okay, you run this card against some strategy. There's enough strategies in this. Like, Snake Eyes is, like, popping right now, right? I feel like this card just absolutely ruins that deck, right? From what I remember, it's like I feel like a lot of the stuff happened with the graveyard. I could be completely wrong and misremembering, but I feel like this would just roll them. Like you could do this on your turn. So like they try to do their strategy, and it's like, okay, if they play a card and it's like send another card to the graveyard, you would play that when that card is activated, so the chain would work that this would go off first and then their effect would go off.
Correct.
So then therefore that their minion does not go into the graveyard.
Correct.
Right. So based on that logic, I feel like this card's very good. Like I couldn't imagine it not being very good. And I you know what? I'm gonna probably say it's banned.
Final answer?
Final answer.
So you mentioned how you've never seen this card being played.
Yeah, is that right? Is that right? Is that right?
So I don't recall like when you exactly played and like what decks you were facing against. So because like I'm gonna take a guess here. I don't think Sword Soul was the meta deck to be playing when you were on your Yu-Gi-Oh.
So the only reason Sword Soul happened was because when I messaged Farfa, he told me that they're doing like a free deck for it. So I was
right.
like,
And it's also just an easy, like, I don't want to say easy. It's a fairly linear deck, all things considered,
Yes,
in terms
yeah.
of the combo.
For sure.
So, like I said, I'm not sure what other decks you were playing against frequently, so that could, like, possibly distort whether or not you think Dimension Shifter is good or not. Because if the meta was playing a bunch of decks where Shifter isn't necessarily good, then maybe people aren't playing it, right? But Shifter is interesting because when it was first released, it was released as a promo card alongside two other really powerful cards, Dark Ruler No More and Nibiru the Primal Being. You might be familiar with either of those. Dimension Shifter was the worst of those three released by far. It was just not even close. People looked at it and they're like, this card, like, Nibiru's insane, Dark Ruler's insane, Dimension Shifter sucks. Like, why is this, like, one of the cards they printed? This was, like, a card that the TCG exclusively made to try to combat decks for, like, going first and to try to, like, punish them to, like, rein the power of decks in line. As time went on, and as decks got even crazier, and especially as Graveyard Reliance became more and more prolific, Dimension Shifter started to make its way into players' decks. Now, the problem with Dimension Shifter is that if you are playing a graveyard-based deck yourself, you can't really play Dimension Shifter because Dimension Shifter also works during your turn. It is, when it's activated, it works for that turn, but then it also works for the next turn as well, which is kind of frustrating. You need to play Dimension Shifter in a particular deck in order to take full advantage of it. You basically need to be playing a deck that doesn't care about the graveyard, or you're playing like a straight up just stun anti-meta strategy that like you just want to make sure they just never get to play the game. And so throughout many of formats, Snake Eyes you mentioned is a very popular one now especially. Tier Element before was also very popular. Dimension Shifter saw its place in several decks that were just anti-meta towards what the best decks were. Now it's gotten to the point that Dimension Shifter, people are so sick of it, especially in a meta that is like 90% Snake Eyes, that people are calling out for this card to be banned because it's one of those cards that if you're going first as a Snake Eye player or a player playing a graveyard-based deck and your opponent just Dimension Shifters you just lose the game. Like, there's like barely any counterplay to it. If they open the Shifter, you can't play because everything requires you to actually have the graveyard. So it just turns a game into a non-game, and then you would just pass the turn and your opponent just kills you. So very toxic card. A card that people are crying out to be banned, but is currently not banned, and people are hoping on the upcoming ban list that it does get banned because people are very sick of it.
Okay. I was like, you can see from my perspective, I was kind of like preemptively cheering because it sounded like I was right. But then I like,
and you were.
Well, I said it was banned, so I like.
Oh, you said it was banned? Oh, never mind. Okay,
yeah,
so you didn't get that part right.
I like slowly started to put my hands back down as we were talking. I was like, oh, I don't know if it's actually banned anymore, guys. But I mean, it makes sense. The card is like a lot of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh almost feel like they're just waiting for like a critical mass of something to happen, and then they just become the greatest card on the planet, right?
Yeah, some people are making the argument that if there were more decks that interacted with the banish pile, that Dimension Shifter wouldn't be as bad. But I think in the context of like this specific meta game and the past metas that we've had, for the past several months and years, Dimension Shifter just shits on all of them. But the thing is, you're not going to play Dimension Shifter in every deck because it is a bit limiting in the fact that it hurts you as well. You either have to be playing the deck that can play it, or you just don't play it at all.
But here's a counter argument. This is the first time where I think this card is actually necessary, because I feel like every time I go to Farfa's stream or something, everyone's yelling about Snake Eyes being fucking broken and it needs to be removed, because I feel like it's still like a really good deck, right? Isn't it good that a card like this exists to force people to play something else? Even though it does affect the graveyard on your side, like I feel like to innovate a new strategy in Yu-Gi-Oh, so it's not only Snake Eyes, isn't this like a necessary evil to have in the game?
I think the problem that most people have, I would agree with you, but I think the problem is this is not the type of interaction that people want, because while yes, Dimension Shifter does combat Snake Eyes and other graveyard-based decks, I think people want solutions that aren't just, oh, you just turn skip your opponent. I think people want something where, and this is also partially it's partially a Snake Eyes problem, where it's people want the decks to be interactive with each other, not just, oh, I'm going to play this floodgate or this toxic card, so then you just get to pass your turn, and then I just win as a result of drawing this card, right? Like, that's not really fun. That if you think about it, you both draw your opening 5 cards. Oh, look, I have Dimension Shifter. I win the game. Like, and you could argue, like, okay, as someone who's playing Snake Eye, like, you should have something to combat that, but it's worse because it's not something that's in every deck. It's only going to be in the decks that are specifically being played to counter it, and so it's frustrating because there's no other solution other than make sure they just can't play the game at all. People want to have like the interactive back and forth of playing the game without it just being like, oh, did I draw my floodgate to just auto win the game, essentially.
I guess that perspective makes sense, but I feel like at this point it's almost impossible to design a card like that in Yu-Gi-Oh.
You would think that, but there have been a few formats recently that have showed that it's possible. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Is slowly starting to, or rather Konami is slowly starting to put a lot of these types of floodgate cards on the ban list to like prevent that type of play style from being the way to combat these decks. So like, for instance, there was the format not too long ago with like Rescue Ace and a few other strategies. That was like a really interactive format, but then also Tier Element format, even though that was like the best deck by a mile, it was a super interactive format that people absolutely loved. So it really just depends on the decks themselves and what they're able to do, but then also like what those answers are. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Just has a lot, like Skill Drain and Kaiser Coliseum are really old cards. Shifter isn't that old. So like they obviously printed this to curb that power, but it's like not in a way that is healthy and interactive. It's like, oh, I'm gonna draw my silver bullet and win the game immediately. Like fun and skillful.
Okay,
great.
I can get that perspective. Okay, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Like, for instance, I believe it was the European World Championship qualifier that just took place. The final match, it was Snake Eye versus a guy playing a Dimension Shifter deck. It was game 3. The guy who was playing the Dimension Shifter deck opened Dimension Shifter and just won the game as a result of it. It was over. Like, the other guy just lost because he can't play through Dimension Shifter. So that was it. And it was like, great, fun game 3. Like, that was for going to the World Championship, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
woo, fun and interactive.
So that is the unfortunate reality of what like tech cards do to the game though, right? This one's probably ubiquitous enough to like be a problem, but I've noticed in like every card game, right? Like if I run a card that destroys your weapon in Hearthstone and your whole deck's built around a weapon, like you just got fucked. Like you're not gonna feel good about that regardless.
I do not envy game designers trying to like figure out solutions to these problems because I feel like it's just going to create more problems as a result.
Yeah, it's also like the argument. I actually have this discussion a lot with other Hearthstone players. It's like, because we don't get to interact on our opponent's turn, is it more important for the card game to have more fun for the person playing the card, or is it equally as important to make sure the opponent who's receiving the card, not receiving the card, but like playing against the person playing the card to have as much fun, right, or like a somewhat of fun and enjoyment, right? But I think the problem with card games is like your opponent's playing cards. It's like you're not gonna have fun regardless. Like just go fuck yourself. Like stop playing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a huge problem where it's like there's so many cards in this game that above all else, Dimension Shifter might be a necessary evil. But I understand how frustrating it is to lose from like a card that just ruins your whole game plan. I was gonna say, you take it a step further, you 5D chess it and you go like, well, if they think I'm gonna run Snake Eyes, so they're gonna run Shifter, I'm just gonna play a deck that doesn't work for the graveyard and then I'm gonna go fuck them. How good is that deck, right? Like that, maybe there needs to be that eventual like next level deck that doesn't use the graveyard as often. That's like game design on the highest level, which I don't even know if Konami's thinking about that.
Well, that's actually like what happened with MBT when he went to the North American World Championship qualifier. He was playing Snake Eye, which is by far and away the best deck. Like, it's like if you're not playing Snake Eye, you're actually just shooting yourself in the foot. And the problem is the people who weren't playing Snake Eye were playing shifter decks or anti-meta decks with some other toxic cards we may or may not see in this video. And he ran into 3 or 4 of those decks in a row, and these decks are literally designed to beat his. But against any other deck, those decks will lose 10 times out of 10. And so, like, is that fun? I think that's something that's debatable, right? Like, do you credit the anti-meta people for making that sort of meta call that they're only going to play Snake Eye for 14 rounds? Or is, I don't know. I think we could do a whole video about this, I think there's a discussion to be had here, for
I feel like Snake Eyes is just the problem. Like, maybe you
just exactly. I think it's on both ends, right? I think it's the answers to these types of decks are necessary, but like too oppressive. But also the deck designs themselves warrant people to play these cards to even have a chance if they're not playing that best deck. So like, right? So they need to solve both sides of it.
No, but so it's interesting. Like, is Dimension Shifter a toxic card because it answers the best deck in the game and it needs to be in the game? Like, that's how it feels like you're explaining it to me. Like, even though that may not be the case, it is a necessary evil if Snake Eyes ends up being the best deck by a mile. Like, you need a card like this in the game to like stop your opponent from playing Snake Eyes. It comes to the other conversation of this is like, is this card actually a problem if a deck like Snake Eyes, which is like leagues above everything else, doesn't exist anymore? Like, then it becomes, is this card actually as toxic as you're making it seem, or at least the community makes it seem? It's like an infinite loop of conversation of like,
right.
does it actually feel bad, or is it like, do you need this card to exist in order for Snake Eyes to just not be the most egregious deck on the planet?
I think the other problem is that there isn't any counterplay to Dimension Shifter. The only card that stops Dimension Shifter is Called by the Grave, and I'm pretty sure that's limited to 1 copy. And Dimension Shifter...
Ooh, Call by the Grave is good. Yeah, that's a good card.
Right. So, like, I think that is the only card, unless you're playing Crossout Designator and putting a Dimension Shifter in your deck to also answer that. There is basically... like 1 or 2 specific counters to this card that there isn't really anything that the player who is playing the best deck has to answer said card. And like, do you just say that's a skill issue? Like, that's what you get for not playing it? Like the conversation could go on and on. But I think especially because there's no way to interact with it on top of it, there's not really much you can do about it.
They need like another card to answer the shifter is what you're saying. So like you can counter the shifter if they go for the shifter. I get you. Yeah, for sure.
Right. Yeah, Called by the Grave is limited, so you would have to have 1 Called by the Grave in your hand, the only one in your deck, and they have 3 Dimension Shifter that they can draw on the first turn. Already, the odds aren't in your favor as a result of that. But then you could argue that Called by the Grave is a toxic card because it stops the dimension. We could keep going. But we need to move on. We've spent probably half of this video talking about Dimension Shifter, but I think it warrants a good discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Card game design's hard.
Well, especially over 25 years. Yeah. Anyway, here's your next card.
Stumbling. Yeah, that's what we were just doing. Any monster that is normal summon, flip summon, or special summon is changed to defense position. I think the art of this card is incredible.
It's cool. Yeah, it's great.
That
old Yu-Gi-Oh art hits way better.
Like I think this is the first time in Yu-Gi-Oh history that the flavor of this card is really well thought out throughout the art and the effect. Like it's actually really sick. This is a weird question, or a weird card in that I don't know how much being in defense position really changes a lot of like modern cards. I mean, maybe like in combat it makes it significantly worse. Like I'm trying to think of like Baron, like for example, like did it really matter it was in defense position? Like I still get to use the effect.
It effectively gives everything summoning sickness, if you want to look at it that way.
Oh, I guess that's fair. I gotta think about it like that. Yeah, because if you're going second,
because Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have summoning sickness. Yu-Gi-Oh, you can play the monster immediately and attack with it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like I gotta remember that because like Magic, it has summoning sickness unless it has like haste.
I'm pretty sure Yu-Gi-Oh is like one of the only games that doesn't have summoning sickness.
Yeah, I think Pokemon actually, like if you go first, you can't attack. But then second player doesn't have summoning sickness for their Pokemon, but you have to start with the Pokemon on the field. So I guess like it's not really summoning sickness whatsoever. This card's interesting. I don't know how good this is in truly modern Yu-Gi-Oh though. But if I like based on what this card was printed, it seems like it's somewhat recent unless this is a reprint.
This card is pretty old. This card I think might be older than... No, it's newer than Skill Drain and Kaiser Glider, but it's older by far than Dimension Shift.
Because I guess it would stop people from attacking, which can be really relevant. That's fucking crazy. So you would play this when your opponent starts to like pop off and be like, haha, no, I get my turn again, you idiot. Interesting. Like I'm just imagining someone like putting their thumb up and like doing like no, like you gotta wait one more turn.
Not today.
Yeah. Which actually seems like a pretty good card if I think of it out loud. Because like if the card read like, oh, you get an extra turn, that's pretty good. Like in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh, like that seems very relevant. Now the bigger question is you get to use a lot of your monster's effects even if they're in defense position. So I'm thinking like Sword Soul here, like you often built a board so your opponent just couldn't do anything and then you just break whatever they're doing. So like does defense position, if all of my monsters are in defense position, does that truly matter? Yeah, I can't attack that turn, but then I'm stopping you from having your turn virtually because my board's already built. In older Yu-Gi-Oh, this probably slapped ass, I'm gonna be honest, but like I don't know. I can see it though. I want it to be good. I want it to be good, but I don't think it's good. And I'm gonna say it's not, and I'm also gonna say it's not banned, obviously, if I don't think it's good.
Final answer.
Yeah, I'm hoping you tell me this is good though. This is a cool card.
I didn't think you were gonna actually just love this card as much as you did, nor discuss it as long. You're correct though. This card is bad. This card is bad. It's never been banned. In very old Yu-Gi-Oh, there were some decks, very few, that would actually play this card, and it was like a nuisance, but it wasn't like, oh, this card is going to just win me the game because I'm playing it. No. It was just a card that some decks would play if they were playing like a burn deck or some sort of stall or mill deck, just to have a way to slow the opponent down from killing them, because older Yu-Gi-Oh was very combat-centric. But you figured out that by newer Yu-Gi-Oh standards, like everything can still use its effects in defense position. It doesn't really matter all that much. It's like... It's not the worst card ever printed, obviously. Like, it's fine. It has a home in some old Yu-Gi-Oh decks, and it had a place back then. This card was rarely ever seen. Like, maybe on the playground at most, but that was, like, about it. But cool art. I mean, it's got cool art. That's one thing it's got going for it.
It is. I fucking love it, to be honest. I think it's really cool. Wait, what monster is that? Is that like another
That
monster?
is Gaga Gigo. Do you want to see Gaga Gigo?
Now that you say the name, absolutely. Like, what the hell is that? What did you call me?
There's Gaga Gigo. There's lore behind this. He's in multiple artworks. He's kind of cool looking. He's also not bad. He's an 1850 normal summon, which for old Yu-Gi-Oh is like okay.
He's the OG. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, he's kind of cool. He's a cool little guy. All right, let's show you your next card.
Scrap Iron Scarecrow. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, target the attacking monster and then negate the attack. Also, after that, set this face down instead of sending it to the graveyard. Oh, so this is like infinite. Is that what that means? Like you just keep... what the fuck? So
remember, if a trap card is set, it cannot be used the turn that it is set. So keep that in mind.
Oh, so it's once per turn. It's once per turn. Okay. Why are you laughing?
With your reaction to this card, it's infinite. I mean, it's still technically infinite. It's just not as infinite as you thought it was.
Yeah. So again, this is like one of the cases like where I think an older Yu-Gi-Oh! It might actually be really good because even if you're blocking, like if they have a blue eyes and they have some other shitter of whatever, like yeah, they're attacking with their like little dude, but like if I'm stopping blue eyes from playing the game the whole time, they went through all that effort for nothing. In reality, does it ever really work like that? You've shown me enough cards where you could break this card, and even if they do it once, you now know it's there, so it's like whatever, like you could play around it. I guess you can. I guess it's gonna delay the game like an older Yu-Gi-Oh, but like in current Yu-Gi-Oh, like there's no fucking way this card's being played. There's no way. But let me negate the attack. If there's like a minion that goes, when this attacks, this effect happens, and then you negate that attack, does that effect still proc? I don't know if there actually is an effect like that in Yu-Gi-Oh.
There are. I think it just depends on how the card is worded. So I will say yes, but it depends.
Because like Hearthstone has like when this attacks, do this effect. And
so there are some cards that say like if this card attacks at the end of the damage step, and since they never got to the damage step since the attack got negated by Scarecrow, like that effect wouldn't activate. But if it's just like if this card attacks, probably you'd be able to activate it before Scrap Iron Scarecrow can actually be used. So I think it just depends on the card, to be honest.
I mean, this can't be good. Surely this isn't good. I'm just trying to like warp my brain around to see if I can think of anything else that would make this card playable. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh, I seriously doubt this is playable. So I have to go with like it's not good and not banned.
Final answer.
Yeah. Okay. Based on that, you're gonna be like, oh fuck yeah, this card's broken. Let's go. That's my final answer. It's not good. I don't think
Scrap Iron Scarecrow is very funny. So recently, Scrap Iron Scarecrow actually started seeing some playability in Edison format of all things. You're slightly familiar with Edison from one of our first videos. People started realizing that Edison format is actually slow enough that a card like Scrap Iron Scarecrow is actually like playable and actually okay depending on the deck that you're playing. There's also not enough spell and trap removal in Edison that sometimes that the Scarecrow can actually put in a lot of work. So then modern players took note of that and started looking at Scrap Iron Scarecrow and thinking, wait a minute, we can actually take advantage of this too. And then they never did because the card sucks and it's bad. You're correct. I didn't take you on the roller coaster. I didn't take you on the roller coaster.
I was waiting for what the pop-up was. When you start a sentence with in Edison, this card's seeing play, like somewhat, like I'm like, okay, there's no way this card's good.
To be fair, there are some. Are there some? Yeah, there are some cards in Edison that still see play actually, which is kind of unbelievable if you think about it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. There should be some good cards from there, like Metamorphosis or whatever. Wasn't that from there?
That was not legal in Edison.
Oh, that was not? Okay, psych.
But there's a card that's called Allure of Darkness, for instance. All it says is draw 2 cards, then banish a dark monster from your hand. That still sees play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!
What if you don't have a dark monster in hand?
You have to discard your whole hand. Oh. You're playing in a deck that's all darks. Like, you're never going to miss. And also, it was limited in that format. I think now Allure of Darkness is actually legal at 3 copies, which is crazy to think about. Yeah, it's a cool card. It's a cool card. All right, speaking of cool cards, what do you think about this guy?
Holy fuck, that's a lot of text.
Yeah, sorry, he's got a lot of text. And actually, unfortunately, it's all relevant too, so I can't tell you to like
Dude,
not read it.
Look at his name. I have to like crunch it together to make sure it fits.
Oh, there's worse cards than that.
Just in case anyone's curious, this is the true Draco
Slaying King. Well, there is the Draco Slaying King, and then there's the true Draco Slaying King.
Masterpiece. The true Draco slaying king. Look at this guy. Holy shit.
He's pretty cool, right? His art's insane.
They could have picked a different background to make him pop more, dude. What the hell? They're not doing him justice. Where is this guy? Is he in the fucking, is this heaven?
He's in the void.
All right. Contribute summon this card face up. You contribute continuous spells / trap cards you control. You could, okay, only one, I guess. You contribute a continuous spell / trap card you control, as well as monsters.
So you contribute any combination, just for clarification.
That is very interesting. I don't think I've ever seen a card that can use like traps like that or spells like that.
So this archetype, that's one of their gimmicks, is that they contribute any continuous spell, continuous trap, or monster for its tribute summon.
That's kind of cool. Okay.
It's neat. It's cool. Yeah, keep going though. Keep going.
Unaffected by the effects of cards with the same card type. Monster, spell, and or trap as the original card type of the cards. Oh my god, that's fucking sick. So, like, depending on what you use to sacrifice this, like it doesn't get affected by those cards. And
correct.
You need two of the three?
It's a 2 tribute, yes.
Ooh, okay. Once per turn during either player's turn, if you control a tribute summon monster, you can banish one continuous spell / trap card from your graveyard, then target one other card on the field and destroy it. Wow, okay. That means you're guaranteed at least one banish, because you're at least using a spell or a trap to do this. That's such an interesting design card. Spell and or trap. It has to be continuous. So like it has to be like one of those aura cards you showed me earlier, like stumbling.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but I will say that for this archetype, they have their own like archetype specific continuous spells and traps that you would play in this deck. So you can tribute like stumbling or some of the other cards you've seen, but it has its own cards for the archetype as well.
Okay. I mean, this card's cooking though. I'll tell you what, that's pretty sick. Oh my god, I don't even know how to really evaluate that, because that's it. I really like how this card gives you the choice of like what you actually need to play against. Like if I'm going against Sword Soul, right? Like I could do just like maybe spell and monster, and like I just hope they don't have like I think there's like one trap card that actually deals with this. I forget what it's called.
Yeah, blackout.
Yeah, so like as long as they don't have that, it's like okay, I'm chilling. I do like the concept of like picking what you want to sacrifice. Now the question is, how good is this actually? You get to banish a card. Wait, so you get to target one of them to destroy it. So the card that you destroy is sent to the graveyard, right? You don't actually banish it.
You don't banish it. No, it just goes to grave.
Once per turn. It's not a quick effect either.
It is a quick effect. It says once per turn during either player's turn. This is before they standardized using quick effect to show can be used during either player's turn, not long after Masterpiece was printed. So some cards still say once per turn during either player's turn.
Okay, I think this, oh my god, that makes me think this card's pretty great. But I mean, how likely are you to have, so you said they built like an archetype for this?
Yeah, I mean, similar to how like Hearthstone has classes and Sword Soul, right? I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh has myriad of different archetypes. So the Draco Slayer archetype, yes, they do have continuous spells and traps that benefit the archetype.
Yeah, I'm just trying to really think like how likely are you to have like enough spells and trap cards for you to like really get a payoff for this? I'm guessing even if you hit one though, it's fine. I don't even know. Is Baron banned yet?
Yes, actually.
Oh, wow,
not
really?
in Master Duel, but in the TCG. I don't know about the OCG, but in TCG, Baron is banned.
Now, Baron was really good because you just stop like one card, as far as I remember. It's also got like a decent body, but for the most part, from what I remember, it was just like to stop your opponent from playing like a card. This is like the same effect, right? I imagine like for one, it's basically what Baron did, just like you have to do it slightly different, correct? Just so I understand what it actually looks like.
Yeah, it's not a negation, which is relevant. I mean, it's just destroying a card. So like if your opponent's using an effect, you won't be able to stop the effect from resolving, but you'll be able to destroy something, for instance. Where Baron would negate and destroy. So there's two differences there.
Baron's effect is just objectively better. Is like from what I'm understanding. If you're gonna use this once, like negating and banishing a card is like infinitely better than just banishing a card.
Well, I think it depends, because Baron, if I recall, only gets that negation effect once while it's on the field.
No, which is 100% correct. I believe it only got one. But what I mean is like if I'm only doing one effect from Masterpiece, I would rather have Baron's effect like almost every single time.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
If I'm only doing it once.
I think it is really dependent on the context of the board, because Masterpiece is a bit more proactive, because with Baron also has the effect to target a card on the field and destroy it, if you recall. It has two effects. So, I mean, it also has the same effect as Masterpiece. So, like, the negation effect is more reactive, where the popping effect is more proactive. But Baron's pop effect, if I recall correctly, is not a quick effect. I'm pretty sure that has to be used at ignition speed.
Really gauge how good this effect is. I think it's good. It's just like, is it is it bannable? Like that's where I'm really like, I'm gonna ask one more question for this archetype. Is there like a continuous spell or trap card that really benefits if it's from the banish or the banish zone, I guess is what you call it?
Like when you're tributing for Masterpiece, is that what you're asking?
No, so like it says you can banish one continuous spell and trap card from your graveyard, right? Are there trap cards and continuous spells that are very good if they're banished? Is that ever a card? Is that ever an effect like Yu-Gi-Oh? So like for instance, like if I banish a particular spell, it gets like another benefit for banishing that card.
I understand what you're asking. For the purposes of this, the continuous spells and traps that work with this archetype, they gain an effect when they are sent to the graveyard. Not necessarily just for a tribute summon, but just period. If they're sent to the graveyard, they do something. So nothing with Masterpiece banishing it triggers it, but when Masterpiece uses them to tribute summon himself, there are cards in the archetype that will gain an effect as a result of that.
Man,
so it's yes, but in a different way than you're thinking.
This is tough. This is really tough. I feel like it really depends on what these spells or trap cards are. I feel like the effect is good, but like, is it at a level to be banned? I'm not really sure, but I think the card.
I will let you know for the purpose of this, the spells and traps are irrelevant. Like really? They're good, but they are not. You can analyze this card in a vacuum, which is why I picked it.
If you're gonna say that, then I will say this card was probably pretty good, and it was probably banned. There are Hearthstone cards that in a vacuum, like they are good, but they've gotten better with like contextual elements to it. So that's why I'm asking.
Sure.
And if you're asking if a card is banned, like I feel like it has to be past that threshold of just like it's playable. In a vacuum, I'll say this card's good and banned.
Final answer?
Final answer.
Oh, Masterpiece. Masterpiece, Masterpiece, Masterpiece. Where do we start with this card? You're correct. I guess I sort of gave it away when I said that about being able to analyze this in a vacuum, but Masterpiece, oh, fuck this card, dude. So many people are so happy that this card is banned. So the reason why this card is so oppressive is just the first part of the effect. The fact that whatever you tribute, it's going to be immune to those types of effects. And the thing is, especially with modern Yu-Gi-Oh does not really play trap cards. Like, let's be honest. The only real trap cards you're playing are like infinite impermanence, evenly matched, let's say, and then if you're playing like a trap-based deck, then you're going to have traps in your deck. So most of the time with Masterpiece, if you contribute it with a monster plus a spell card and have it have monster spell immunity, it's going to basically be unoutable from your opponent. Your opponent will literally just not have an answer to this card. The only real counterplay to Masterpiece, aside from the third wedge of like what it's not immune to, you being able to like handle it that way, if your deck doesn't have a way to deal with it in that sense, there are cards that you may or may not be familiar with called Kaijus. What Kaijus are is that they're a monster that you contribute an opponent's monster and give them that monster in its place. And so that's not a monster effect. That's a way to summon it to the field. So by using a Kaiju to tribute over their Masterpiece, that is how you'd have to out it. But you'd have to like draw the Kaiju to be able to out Masterpiece. Not to mention, it has the quick effect to pop something during every single turn, which is even more annoying because if you do have a way to out it, let's say it's monster spell immune and you have a trap card, you set the trap card face down, end phase, I'm going to activate Masterpiece, pop the trap card, now you can't use it. So incredibly frustrating card to play against. It like just so like during its time, it was, oh my God. I'm having flashbacks just talking about it. This card is so fucking irritating to play against. Like every time you'd see it, it's like it was one of the best decks you could be playing, and they played it with other archetypes as well. It wasn't just played only in the Draco slaying archetype. But man, this card is just, oh my God, this card is irritating.
So when I played, you're speaking about like the Kaijus. When I played Master Duel, I forget what monster my chat was saying, but I think it's like if I have like 5 monsters on my side of the board or something, it can sacrifice all of them and play a minion. Am I thinking of the right monster? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know there's one that does 3.
Maybe
the Kaiju just does 1. There's one that does 2, and there's one that does 3. I'm not sure about 5. Though.
Okay, maybe it was 3 then. I honestly can't remember because my chat would just be like, wait for it. Like, I don't think it ever happened, but I remember them being like, oh, you should play around this. I'm like, dude, I'm not playing around this fucking card. Are you insane?
On top of it, too, with Masterpiece, so the cards that it would, like, send to the graveyard that are in Archetype, they'd have an effect, like, when this card's sent to the graveyard, like, destroy a spell or trap on the field, or destroy a monster on the field. So you got even more value for using those cards to tribute summon out Masterpiece. Also, they had abilities where you would do your normal summon for the turn, and then the spell card, for instance, would say you can tribute summon a Draco Slayer monster in addition to your normal summon for this turn. So you could go like normal summon a monster, play the spell, and then activate the spell to tribute the monster and the spell to summon Masterpiece, and then use the effect to pop a back row, and then banish the card you just sent with Masterpiece to pop another card. And you could just see this card is so obnoxious.
Yeah, it seems pretty good.
This was 2017. This is actually somewhat recent.
Oh.
And it did not last very long, as you can imagine.
Yeah, it's gotta feel really bad from a card designer perspective to be like, oh, this card's so fucking sick. And then like they're like, oh shit, we gotta ban it, boys. It's been a week.
You might be familiar with this one.
Super Polymerization. Discard 1 card. Fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from either field as fusion material. Neither player can activate or effects in response to this card's activation. So you're just saying, like, you could use your opponent's monster to special summon something. Like this is the same thing. Discard 1 card. Fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from either field as fusion material. So you don't even have to use monsters on your side. If they just have enough, like, you're just chilling.
It says either field.
That's fucked up. Oh, that is crazy. That is, and you can't even respond to it. That doesn't seem fun. That seems awful. Like this is objectively like a fucking, this is awful. Like, I hate looking at it. I couldn't imagine how frustrated I would be to just get this card played against me. There's no way this card is still legal. I'm gonna go with it's banned. Like, there's no way this is such a bad design of a card. Like, please tell me it's banned.
Final answer.
That's final answer. That's horrific. That's especially a game like you. Yeah, it's fucked up. That's fucked up. Okay, yeah.
He's still going. I hate to tell you, but this card is not banned and is at 3 copies.
Really? Does it get played?
I think it's actually maybe semi-limited in the OCG. So Super Polymerization is a very old card. It's a card that was printed, I want to say like 2006, 2007. And the thing is, this is when fusion summoning was really bad. Like, there was no good fusion-based archetypes like there are nowadays. And so this was sort of a card to maybe help you fusion summon, right? Because if your opponent can't respond, maybe that's your big way to win the game. Cool. Like, that's your big payoff, essentially. You wouldn't be using your opponent's monsters. It'd be for your own fusion monsters. As Yu-Gi-Oh! Progressed, they started printing monsters that had very generic requirements. So it would say like 2 monsters of the same type or 2 monsters of the same attribute, or some just say 2 monsters and like that's it, right?
Okay.
Super Polymerization all of a sudden started getting better and better, that people started to believe that Konami specifically printed fusion monsters that were super poly targets so that people could use Super Polymerization reactively into the opponent's board. And Super Polymerization is actually considered to be quite a strong card for decks that can support it, because if your opponent puts up a board of like 4, 5, 6, 7 negates, Super Polymerization is actually one of the few cards that can make it so that your opponent can't respond to it, which doesn't sound healthy, but if your opponent goes first and sets up a complete board uninterrupted, that's not necessarily healthy either. So Super Poly is like a good board-breaking, equalizing type card to give you a fighting chance in that game. But the fact that you can just only use your opponent's monsters to then like summon your own thing, and the fact that I think the biggest issue, I don't think any card in a card game should say neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. That is just not okay. But for Yu-Gi-Oh! It's kind of weird because it sort of fills this niche of dimension shifter, board breaking type card where it's like it gives you a fighting chance if you aren't going first in a particular game. And let's say you don't open Max C or you don't open other hand traps. This is a card that gets you back in the game. Now, the problem is, again, if your board gets super polyed and they have it and you have no way to respond to it, similar to Dimension Shifter, it just feels like shit because now like you just lost the game because you got super polyed. So it's a really unhealthy card, but it's not something that I would say it's toxic, but it's not like the most toxic thing ever. It does come with a lot of concessions. You do have to discard a card. You do have to be playing the monsters in your extra deck to be able to summon off of Super Poly. So there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration when playing a card like this. But there's plenty of clips out there of people getting their entire board super polyed and just crying over it because it's just unfair. As Yu-Gi-Oh got older, this card got a lot better.
Yeah, it's also like a really emotionally evocative card, right? That's crazy. I can't believe this isn't banned, actually. That's wild.
I think because of the fact that neither player can respond is the worst part about this. I don't necessarily think using your opponent's monsters only is the bad part. I think that's okay. I think it's just the fact that you can't do anything about it is the worst part about it.
Yeah. That's miserable. I'm actually very surprised it's not like even to limit it to one copy. Like that just seems. It's not even like a power level thing. It's like a game design thing. So that's why I'm more surprised. Like I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh would have to like look at this card and be like, do we really want this in our game?
I will say one of the interesting elements when it comes to playing Yu-Gi-Oh is that people will specifically, if Super Poly is considered to be a good board breaking card, people will look and say, can we build a board that we're going to make going first that is immune to getting super polyed? And that is something that people have to consider like when they're formulating their combos and such. There's been plenty of times where it's like, this card is good, but if you can make a board that plays around it, now all of a sudden super polymerization is a dead card in their hand.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Okay, there is like, you can play around it kind of, but it's
kind of.
Yeah. It's the same case of like, if this card techs against your deck, like you're just fucked.
What about this card?
Okay. This gives me flashbacks to when I was younger as well.
It's a very old card.
I feel like I know the art. Imperial Order. Negate all spell effects on the field. Once per turn during the standby phase, you may pay 700 life points. This is not optional, by the way. You must pay 700 life points. My bad. Or this card is destroyed. Wow. Negate all spell effects on the field. Okay, so you're gonna have to clarify something for me. Let's say you play a spell that's not like an aura. I'm gonna call them auras because that's what we call in Hearthstone. Like if it has like a continuous effect, it's an aura. So if you play a spell that has an aura, flip this card, that a spell does not work anymore.
Correct.
And if they play a spell that is like a one-time thing, I don't know if we really have an example. So I was gonna say like polymerization, but like it doesn't really work.
Like Pot of Greed.
Yeah, like Pot of Greed. They put that on the board, then you flip this. Does Pot of Greed still go through?
No.
Okay, so this actually is like a global counter spell.
For spells, not
trap cards. I gotta make that here. Okay. Wow. To have a full counter spell for spells and you only pay 700 life points per turn, and that means they would have to have what, a trap card or a monster effect to answer this. And I
do want to clarify one thing. You have to pay 700 during each standby phase. That counts your opponents.
Okay, but that's not, so the turn you flip it, you're not paying anything. It starts on your turn.
It starts on whatever the next standby phase is. So for full turn cycle, it's 1400 life points. Because it's 700 during your turn, 700 during your opponent's, etc.
So this is what it's gonna come down to for me, right? Like I don't think that's actually really relevant because again, I was making this claim with like a new card game player. We were playing Arcana on the weekend. Like if a card doesn't actually lose you the game and it gives you such a huge advantage, even if you're at 1 life point and this card wins you the game because of it, like it did its job regardless of what your life points was. Like this card's effect is fucking amazing.
But it also negates your spells too, remember.
But you would put this in a deck where like it is good for you, right? Like that's one of the great things about like Yu-Gi-Oh. There's so many cards over time that would probably be okay with this. If you're building your deck and the only thing that it loses to is potentially like a spell effect, like and you're playing around that, like that seems very, very good for 700 life points per standby phase. The question is that actually that good? In Hearthstone, would I play this? Yeah, I fucking play this in a heartbeat. Oh my God, in Hearthstone, this would be disgusting. But in Yu-Gi-Oh, where monsters effects are so strong, but like yeah, that's a good effect. God, this is like a teeter totter because like you can go either way on this one. It's so good in the right matchup though. I feel like in older Yu-Gi-Oh, this was really good. I'm just trying to think of like in modern how good this would actually be. Because you've spoken to me like in older Yu-Gi-Oh, like spell cards were so powerful. So does it really progress that far throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history to where we are now for this card to still be that good and relevant? I'm gonna go with it's probably. Oh my God, I want to say it's actually really good.
You're struggling with this one. You're struggling.
This one's tough because it's like I've seen I've seen monsters effects that are fucking broken. So like, is this really gonna be the end? Fair. So like, that's what I mean. Like in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh, I could see this being extremely good because monsters effects weren't just like, oh, let me fuck your board up, right? It was just like I play this monster effect, like it's got big stats, and like you need a spell to actually interact with me.
Sure.
In modern Yu-Gi-Oh, like I've seen Sword Soul, and even Sword Soul like has very like good effects to just be like, okay, I don't care about this card whatsoever. I think in modern, like it's probably not as good, but The thing is like this card is just so like it's just such a powerful effect. I feel like you have to think about it, which makes you believe it's good. And I think it probably is banned. I think this is like a scary ass card to have in the game. So I'm gonna risk it. I think it is banned.
You sure? Final answer? You don't sound convinced. You don't sound convinced.
I could go either way here, but I because you won't let me go in the middle. Like I have to say banned or not banned. So I will go with banned.
Final answer?
Final answer.
You're correct. You're correct. I'm not even gonna put you through it. Yes, Imperial Order. What would you do if I told you this is the errated version of this card?
Wow, that's pretty disgusting. Wait, what's the non-errated version?
The original version of Imperial Order. The original version is optional. So you had the choice to turn it off on your own standby. Well, first of all, you only had to pay the 700 during your standby phase for one, not both. Then you could turn it off on your own turn instead of paying for it, where the current version, once it's active, it's not optional. So you have to pay for it until you can no longer pay for it or it gets destroyed somehow. So the old version of Imperial Order would work like this. You would go, your opponent activates a spell, you would chain Imperial Order, negate it. Then on your turn, you would let it go to the graveyard and activate all your spells all you want because you don't care. It just negated any spell card, essentially.
Oh, I get you.
So it was incredibly busted, incredibly broken, got banned very quickly. And then they decided, for some unbeknown reason, just for some inconceivable reason, they're like, you know what? We can bring Imperial Order back. Let's give it some tweaks. Let's make it a bit more balanced, in quotes, and let's see what happens. And they released it, and it was banned very quickly after they errated it because they're like, oh shit, this card is still just as bad as it was before.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So the thing is, like you're talking about when it comes to monster effects, yes, monster effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! Do a lot. But the thing is, especially because I said this before with Masterpiece specifically, Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks for the most part, are all comprised of monsters and spells. It's like 20 monsters, 20 spells. You know, there's a lot of spell density in Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks just because the spells typically get you to the monsters, right? Also, when you look at a card like Super Polymerization, for instance, there are cards that if you go first, you set up a board, your opponent is going to typically break your board with spell cards because those are the cards that can be activated immediately. Ideally, if you have a way that you can get Imperial Order out of the deck and set it to the field on your first turn, or if you just draw it because you're good like that, then you set up your board. As soon as your opponent's turn starts, you just flip Imperial Order. Now you've maybe just shut off like half the cards in their hand, and now they're not going to be able to play the game. The cards they were going to use to break your board are offline, just everything. So it didn't matter. Like, the game was just over at that point. And so,
makes sense.
Rightfully so, this card is banned and is never coming back.
Yep, makes sense.
Yep. It's funny, though, that it took you that long to arrive at that conclusion, though.
It's tough because, like, again, Monsters Effect seems so good. So is it really... In my Hearthstone brain, I'm like, is that really that good at Yu-Gi-Oh? Again, in Hearthstone, this is fucking gross. I would play this card. You'd win so many
like
games
if you had to pay 3 life or 2 life every turn to make sure your opponent couldn't play spells, I think you would play that in Hearthstone. Like, that would be insane.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, it'd be broken.
Last one for you.
Ooh, Mystic Mine. Your opponent controls more monsters than you do. Your opponent cannot activate monster effects or declare an attack. You can't, if you control more monsters than your opponent does, you cannot activate monster effects or declare an attack. Once per turn during the end phase, both players control the same number of monsters to destroy this card. Whoa.
This is a newer card. This is like from 2019, I want to say. So this is a newer card.
It's like a pro and a con, but man, if you're going like, so remind me, spell cards you could, I know I should know this by now, but spell cards you could activate in your opponent's turn.
So this is a field spell.
Oh,
field spell is like a continuous spell, but there's a designated zone for it.
Wait, how do you know if it's a field spell? Just so I know.
So there's that little star cross-shaped logo next to the spell card. So you would put that there, and you have to play it on your turn. I will say that there are a couple cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That allow you to activate a field spell directly from your deck. Now, whether or not you think that's good or not is a different story, but I'm just letting you know that there are those cards that exist.
Okay. Now, those spells you speak of, that means if my opponent is activating a monster and I use one of those spells to proc this field spell, their effect does not go through if I have if I have less monsters than they do?
I think based off of how you've read the card, that's an accurate description.
Okay. Listen, I'm just trying to make sure I understand everything. If that is the case, this card seems disgusting. But it's only monsters effects. It's weird. It's like Imperial Order, but for monsters, but they thought about it a little bit more, that it has to be a field spell. Oh my god, I think this is good. Again, it's like, this is such a good fuck you to your opponent. Because if you're going like if your opponent goes first and you can play this, you stop a lot. Like I'm just thinking like again, Sword Soul is like the only thing I really understand from Yu-Gi-Oh. So if you play against me, like I'm just gonna concede. I'm just gonna move on. Like I don't know how I win the game. I guess maybe like I can't. My opponent can really do a lot as soon as they have more monsters than me. So this is like a really well designed card. I like the I don't know why this is on the toxic list. What are the, I guess like maybe it does feel really bad if your opponent rips this if you're going first, because like they kind of stop their whole turn. I can see that. But like would I rather be max seed? So I guess this is less toxic than max seed. Let me think about this in Hearthstone terms. Okay, if my opponent goes first, they're aggro. I can't play on their turn, so I play the following turn. They can no longer attack. They lose the game. I win. Yeah, that seems pretty good. Okay, and they go first. They play monsters. I put this on the field. They stop playing the game. They look very upset across the table from me. I probably won the mental advantage too. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Okay, it's probably good. Now, is it banned? If Imperial Order is banned for spells, would Mystic Mind be banned for minions or monsters? Yes, but then you could use a spell to kill it. You could use spells to kill this, right? I think that's helpful. I
mean, you could have used spells. Well, you couldn't have used spells to kill Imperial Order, but you could have used traps or monsters to kill Imperial Order.
Yeah, that's fair, but I feel like I don't know. Maybe I have the wrong impression of like how powerful spells are in Yu-Gi-Oh, but they seem very, very good.
I think that's accurate. Yeah.
Like I think I don't know if this is. Maybe you can tell me at the end of this video after I answer this, but I feel like spells are greater than monsters, and then monsters are greater than traps. But maybe I'm wrong. Like I feel like there's like an order that they should be going in, and spells are the best thing in Yu-Gi-Oh. Like just based off pot of greed and everything from there. But I don't know. I feel like this card isn't banned. I feel like it's probably playable, but I can see why you put this on this list. I do think the card is really interesting. I can get the frustration of like why this would be upsetting to a player, but I do think a card like this is cool. So like I think it's playable, but I don't think it's banned.
Okay, so for the record, I have it that you said this is a really well-designed card. Is that correct?
Whoa, hold on. From a gameplay perspective, I think it's like a well-designed card. From an emotional standpoint, I think that depends on the context.
I see. So it's the psychic damage that you're really going for.
Yes.
Because I see.
Imagine, okay, like Imperial Order, right? Your opponent sees it. Like, what mental damage you're going to do them? They probably lost or won depending on what their deck is, right? Like you said, half their deck is offline, so it's like they're fucked for it, right? Mystic Mind is kind of like, okay, they play this card against me. And then I can be like, okay, maybe I stop playing minions, so then they can't play any minions. Or I keep saying minions, but like monsters, right? There's like a little like, you know, like, okay, like they kind of fucked me, let me fuck them back, you know? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
that should be your sub sound. That should be your sub sound.
I don't feel like Imperial Order, like you as the opponent, like it's not playing Imperial Order, you have no agency on who's getting fucked. At least with Mystic Mind, like you do get some agency in who's getting fucked here, which is great.
Okay.
Like I
feel Imperial Order counters Mystic Mind for what it's worth.
Exactly. So like you don't get any agency in who's getting fucked. Like that's what I'm saying. So like I feel like in terms of context, like it can't be that bad. I don't know if it's like a really well-designed card, but I do like the fact that you could be like, okay, let me stop so I don't play into this more. And then therefore maybe my opponent can't play very well, or like they can't do like a very optimal turn because they have no room or whatever. Space, I don't know what to call it, like virtual space, because if they play more monsters than me, then they're fucked, whatever. Like I think that's really interesting. So because of that, I think it's played, but I don't think it's banned.
Final answer.
I
cannot wait for you to see the reactions I was doing while you were describing this, because this, aside from Max C, might be the most toxic card I have showed you on this entire list.
I feel like okay. So before you even begin, let me try to digress what you just said to me. Basically,
he has to defend himself. He has to defend himself now. Okay.
If you're doing the fucking and you know what, you're like if you're doing the fucking, it's fine. But as soon as your opponent starts fucking you back, then it's a problem. Okay, I understand. All right, continue.
Okay. Okay. Mystic Mind is a card. Mystic Mind is a card. So it's had a very interesting trajectory in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. So where Mystic Mind actually started was, it was actually the centerpiece of a burn strategy, if you can believe that, because people realized, oh, if I just drop Mystic Mind on my opponent's board, all their monsters can't do anything. Obviously, a lot of decks in Yu-Gi-Oh are primarily comprised of monsters and like spells that like typically get you to monsters or do something of the like. Mystic Mind's gonna shut them down. I play 0 monsters in my deck, and then I'm just gonna play a bunch of burn cards, and I have as many turns as I want because they can't attack me. They can't use their effects. So what are they doing? They're just sitting there. They just lose. I can play all these burn cards that take 4, 5, 6 turns for me to actually kill the opponent. And if they don't have a way to deal with the Mystic Mine, then I win. So that was the first time we ever really saw this card being played. And so a lot of people just thought it was going to be this gimmicky, annoying card that you'd have to see going up against a burn deck. And you just have to have something maybe in your sideboard to like possibly prevent that from happening. What ended up happening is that people thought, why don't we just play this in good decks? Why don't we play this in our modern good decks? And here's how the games would typically go. The player going first would build their board, do whatever, and pass the turn. The player going second would throw everything in their hand at the opponent's board to bait out every negation that they had. And then at the end of it all would activate Mystic Mine, and they would just pass. And the opponent wouldn't have an out to Mystic Mine in their deck, so they just deck out because they probably dug 6, 7, 8 cards deep into their deck from searching for cards, special summoning cards, whatever, and they could pass for 20, 30 turns, and the opponent, if they don't play an out to Mystic Mine that isn't a monster effect, they just lost the game. So competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Devolved into this absolute disgusting state where it was, you got to play the Mystic Mine game. And people started sideboarding cards for Mystic Mine specifically to out it, obviously, because when you're playing any competitive game, that's going to happen. The problem then became Mystic Mine would be played in the same way, but the player who activated Mystic Mine would take a few turns, get a few cards in hand, set some cards down because your max hand limit is 6. So maybe set some of your spell cards face down so you effectively have more cards in hand, right? Then after like 3, 4 turns, they would look at their hand and say, okay, I can kill you on this turn. So then they would, typically decks would have field spells that you could either play over Mystic Mine or they'd have a way to get rid of the Mystic Mine themselves. And then they could just clear their opponent's board and then get rid of the Mystic Mine and then put 8,000 damage on the field and kill the opponent. So if the player didn't draw out to the Mystic Mine before that happened, then it was just GG. And it was absolutely miserable. People just despised having to play against this card, and people were begging for this card to be banned list after list, and they just kept ignoring it until finally the prayers were answered and this card was ultimately banned. And thank fuck for that, because this card is fucking atrocious.
I don't even know the whole time you're explaining that. I'm trying not to laugh. based on my description, we can summarize this card as you fuck me, I fuck you. All right.
Yep. They may as well just printed that as the title of the card, because that's exactly what it is. It's just such a... That's why I commented that you said this was a well-designed card, because it is anything but.
So to be fair, from an outsider's perspective, I truly don't know how this card actually plays. Like, I think...
Of course.
I think the mini game behind it, like, maybe I'm living in Disneyland, but like in Hearthstone, right? Like, if there's 2 minion-based boards in the game, then I try to think about like, okay, like if I play more minions, then I get screwed over. So then I have to play around that. And then it becomes this like weird, like cat and mouse game of like, who's going to play more minions, et cetera, for their effects or whatever. Right. But Hearthstone also like is not as explosive as Yu-Gi-Oh! I want to say. So maybe like that slow buildup of a game makes this card less toxic in a game like Hearthstone. After you describing what happens in Yu-Gi-Oh! I can totally understand where people are coming from. I feel like the play style of stopping my opponent and then just keep ending my turn so my opponent deck out, like that is fucking, that's awful. Like that is not.
There's literally, there are written feature matches. I can send you this if you want to see it. There are literally written feature matches where someone activated Mystic Mine and the next 60 lines of text are player A passed, player B passed, player C passed, player.
That's awful. That's awful. But to give Konami some credit, I truly think that they didn't intend for that to happen. Like they probably thought like the same thing I'm going with. Like, oh, there's like that weird game now. Like, do you play more monsters or not? Right. I totally understand like what actually happened in practicality is disgusting. Like that sounds miserable to play against. So I understand.
Well, at least we got you there. At least we got you.
You got your fucking thumbnail for this video.
I got my thumbnail 100%. I already know what's going on in the thumbnail. Well, that's it, Raren. That's it for some of Yu-Gi-Oh's most toxic cards. What do you think?
This game still sucks. Always has, always will. It's that fucking meme with the guy in the space. You probably know what I'm talking about. Okay.
So guys, that's going to wrap it up for another video. I really hope you all enjoyed. Let's go ahead and shout the patrons for all of their continued support. So shoutouts to Shout1317, Sim00x3, MBT Play Medolce, Moto, Cameron L. Smith, The Synchro Guy, Pony Stark, Dan the Man Hoban, Little Fadeleaf, Draconic, Dylan Rare Hunter, JW11860, Brian Dancer of Class 7, Flannel Daddy, Twinkle Muncher, literally all of the guinea pigs, Cheeks McLapperty, Stolfin Amethyst, Wonder Waffle, MBT canceled by community soon, canceled by all committee soon, canceled by all players soon, Corvain, absolute angriest peacock of the Edison Club, Daniel Howell, and life keeps using solemn judgment on my hopes and dreams. Thank you all so much again for watching, and we will see you next time.